Ladies and gentlemen, our next event of the evening is a one-fall match with a 60-minute time limit.
This is where the big boys play, huh?
This is where the big boys play.
You're listening to Where the Big Boys Play. I'm here with Chad. How you doing, Chad?
Doing great.
We're here today to talk about Great American Bash 1987, which was a tour that happened in July of '87, and it came to us from 3 different arenas. Why don't you go through them, Chad?
Well, on this tape, it's featured. We see the majority of the matches are from the July 4th show in the Omni, which at this point in time I had not even reached my first birthday yet. But as we get into the review, this is really one of the shows that I can kind of go back in retrospect and really look at and wish I'd have been a wrestling fan back then. Growing up in the Atlanta area, because this is a show I really would have loved to have been at. Yeah. Probably in one of my top shows.
Yeah, I mean, it mainly came from the Omni, and then there was also a show on the 18th of July in Charlotte at the Memorial Stadium, and one at the end of the month from Miami, Florida.
And then also Greensboro. We get a couple matches from Greensboro.
There's a Greensboro show as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Tony Schiavone is our host, and we get straight in. Now, I made a mistake last time out. I said that Tom Miller was gone and that Gary Michael Capetta was back. But then I remembered that show was in Baltimore, and Capetta actually he was a weird. I've listened to a number of shoot interviews and things with Capetta, and it was kind of strange. Like he only worked a certain area, like New Jersey, Baltimore. Like most shows up there, regardless of who they were with, tended to get Capetta as the announcer. So that may I don't think he was actually working for Crockett full time. And Tom Miller was still around, and he's on hand here to tell us the rules of the Wargames. The match beyond.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are the rules of the War Games. The War Games consist of 8 periods. The first period is 5 minutes in duration. Each team will be allowed 1 man in the ring at a time during the first period. After the first 5-minute period, the referee will conduct a coin toss to determine who has the advantage. That is to say, who can have 2 men in the ring and who can have 1. He will hold a black flag representing one team having the advantage. He will hold a black flag representing the other team. After all 10 wrestlers are in the ring, it will be time for the match beyond. Submission or surrender. Now, let the War Games begin.
This is also the first show that we have Jim Ross on commentary, following the buyout of the UWF that I mentioned last time. So this is the first ever War Games match. It's called War Games 1: The Bomb. I quite like the way that each of the War Games had titles on this show. We hear Flair's iconic music. And the Horsemen are looking pretty badass as they walk out. We got Flair, Luger, J.J. Dillon, Tully, and Arn. J.J. Dillon is actually a participant. It's 5-on-5, and Dillon is there. No, I don't think that's the best. I mean, just before we even go into this match, probably tactically not the best idea to have the manager in the ring. I mean, I know the Faces had Ellering. But I mean, just looking at Dillon and Ellering, you don't. I mean, he's bound to be a massive handicap, right?
Yeah, I mean, as we go into the match and we describe the ending, it kind of makes sense why the managers are involved, and of course JJ and Paul Ellering, they both are former wrestlers, but they kind of in a couple of ways were a little bit of a detriment to this match, but I don't know. Wargames seems to be a match where a lot of managers are involved sometimes. I know in the '94 Wargames, Colonel Robert Parker is in the match, so it seems like kind of a way in the year where WCW or NWA would kind of throw the manager in there to mix it up. You can sort of see that too from a strategy-wise, because in this type of match, they can kind of stay in one area, stay out of the way of a lot of the main action, and they don't have to necessarily carry a whole match on their own. They can kind of get their shots in and then get out of the way.
Do you think it's a fair assumption that anybody listening to this podcast is going to already know the rules of Wargames? I think so.
I would think so. The only thing that we'll mention, I guess we can talk about it now, is Wargames is such a neat concept, and I know this has been talked about before, but the one thing I always liked, especially in these early Wargames, is how they always tried to get over the concept of the match beyond. Once everybody is in, and here you really saw it, get hyped up by both Miller and Ross on commentary. And it was just a concept like Wargames definitely caught on, but the whole match beyond, once everybody is in, never really caught on or really just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that you forget, maybe we'll get onto it in a second, is that up until the match beyond, they're basically just stuck in there. They just have to take a beating. There's no way to get out of the cage. You're just in there to take punishment. For a good, if you're participant 1, that means you're going to get minimum of 15 minutes, 20 minutes of carnage.
Right.
Anyway, the face team are the Road Warriors and the Superpowers. Superpowers being Dusty Rhodes and Nikita Koloff. And as we mentioned, Paul Ellering is the 5th member of the team. I should have mentioned that we've had some amazing 80s music so far on this show. And the Road Warriors, the face team, come out to some amazing 80s synth. Did you recognize that music at all?
No, I'm guessing when I heard that, just the way the sound levels were on the tape, I would imagine live they came out to Iron Man.
Yeah.
And then just with the commercial release, they dubbed it over with some generic synth 80s music. Because the music was audibly louder than like the Flair's theme from Space Odyssey when he came out.
I had a number of audio issues with this particular show. I will mention that as we get onto it. Anyway, I thought Tom Miller was pretty good going through the rules. He is able to make something feel like a big deal. It's of course for the Horseman, it's Arn Anderson to start, and I think Arn's always in first when he's in the War Games, right? And his first opponent is Dusty. Dusty Rhodes. Now, if you were captaining the face team, would you put Dusty in there first out of the available? What do you think of that strategically, Jeff?
Well, I mean, looking at the face team that you have, there's honestly not anybody that would strike me as a great person to go in first from an endurance standpoint. You got essentially 3 huge muscle heads and Dusty Rhodes and a manager. So I guess Dusty was as good a choice as any in this regard to go in first.
When Dusty's your stamina man, that says a lot about your team.
Not a good bar you're setting right out of the gate.
Anyway, Dusty's on top, as you'd expect to start out with. We see a blatant low blow, first of many this evening. We get a DDT from Dusty, which I believe is called a bulldog by the commentary team. We see that a couple of times tonight. This kind of, was it a DDT or a bulldog? I'm calling it a DDT.
Yeah, it was more like a D. I think I recall the thing. It was a little awkward in how he did it, but he clearly pulled his head down and drove him to the mat in the DDT position instead of kind of putting him in a headlock and then running like the bulldog is. There was a couple of sort of miscalled spots. I don't know if that's just the vernacular or Ross was getting used to it. Yeah. The NWA was kind of nervous, but there was a couple of examples of that.
Dusty rakes Arn's head on the ceiling, which I thought was a pretty nasty spot. He rams his face into the side of the cage. Arn is taking a real beating here at the start, and he's got colour already. Dusty is very dominant in this first section. Arn misses a knee drop, and Dusty gets on the figure 4. The time is, I think it's the 5 minutes have gone, and Tully hits the ring as the second man in. Of course, the Horseman won the coin toss. Has a face team ever won the coin toss?
Oh, I think in... I don't know in the WCW ones, Wargames, we'll have to notice that as we go along. And I can't even remember what TNA Wrestling calls their kind of version of Wargames where they have weapons and all sorts of crap going on. But I do know in one of those, the face team won the coin toss at one point, which was completely ridiculous. Obviously didn't work out very well, but hey, that's TNA, so what can you say?
So now it's basically Dusty versus the Brainbusters, 2-on-1. He gets some elbows in on them, but the heels get on top. Dusty's face is lacerated already. They get him in a figure 4 and then kind of hold him down as well. This goes on for some time. Animal hits the ring. The crowd is just nuts here. He launches into Tully. Tully into the ring via a slingshot. Now, I don't know if this was just my tape but the crowd was so loud during this that I couldn't hear what the announcers were saying. It was like the crowd was louder than Ross and Shivani for me. I literally couldn't make out most of the calls.
It was definitely a huge pop. I mean, the Road Warriors in Atlanta have always been probably behind Chicago, one of their premier towns. And, I mean, Animal in this sequence, the way he cleaned house with power moves and just his viciousness, really played up the crowd and kind of made them into a frenzy. He did a very good job in that section.
The faces managed to isolate Tully. Animal catches on with a nice-looking clothesline. And the faces are pretty much on top as Flair hits the ring. Flair and On double-team Animal into the cage. The heels are obviously 3 versus 2 now. And Tully is just destroying Dusty's knee. And I think Dusty's got this ongoing leg injury that he seems to have had since 1983. His leg is always injured. Nikita comes in. I think that's what happened. Nikita comes in with a double clothesline on Flair and Arn. He gets a massive lariat on Tully. Animal gorilla presses Flair. There's just a lot of violence going on by this stage. Flair eats the cage from Nikita and is bloodied. Now Luger enters the ring, and he power slams Nikita. We get a spiked pile driver on Nikita from Tully and Flair. Everyone is basically dazed and hurt by this stage in the match. Hawk hits the ring and kills basically everyone, and the crowd is just I mean, it's beyond electric. It's one of the loudest crowds I've ever heard, to be honest. And I can only really faintly hear Jim Ross saying in the background that bodies are clashing. He says, so Flair has the figure 4 on Dusty. Now J.J. Dillon has to get into the ring, and I wouldn't like to be him, or indeed anyone walking into this environment. Hawk completely no-sells all of Dillon's punches. Flair makes the save. Tony Schiavone says, "Who can survive?" And Jim Ross says, "The sighs of pain," which I thought was a cool thing of Ross to say. We get a big shoulder breaker on Luger by Hawk. Tom Miller announces that the match beyond is going to start as Paul Ellering enters. J.J. Dillon is heavily bleeding. We get another big lariat from Nikita on Tully. The Road Warriors have prone J.J. and beat the living shit out of him. We get a Doomsday Device on J.J. Now, I don't believe it was called the Doomsday Device in 1987, but that's what it was. Still, we get no pin. Dillon, I don't think can you pin in the... You can't pin, they have to submit, right?
No, they always make it... They kept yelling, it's submission or surrender only, which... Again, was kind of comical because that to me seems like the same thing. I mean, either your submission by definition is you surrendering or giving up. So
now,
I don't quite know the distinction between a submission or a surrender.
Dillon is basically dead at this point, and he apparently submits, and the match is over. And he's just a bloody he legitimately looks like he's dead. So, Chad, thoughts on this rather epic match?
Yeah, there's a lot going on with this match. Obviously, it's a classic match that has a big reputation, and deservingly so. You get 20 minutes of non-stop action, just in Parv running down the description of the match. I think you get a good sense of really the chaos and intensity and relentlessness of this match. I mean, from bell to bell, while in most sequences it may have just been punches or, somebody getting rammed into the cage, everything was done with real authority. Everybody was bleeding all over the place. And there was a ton of really neat spots sprinkled in. So this was really rewarding to see. I mean, this is the first match of this kind, and it was done so perfectly. All the roles were played to a T. The psychology of the match with the heels constantly winning the advantage from the coin toss was so smart. Even the strategy at the end with JJ, them going after their weakest link in JJ, was a very smart strategy by the faces to win the match. So to me, in Wargames is one of the classic gimmick matches in wrestling history, and to see it be done so well right out of the gate was very refreshing and rewarding, because by comparison, the Royal Rumble, the first Royal Rumble is not terrible, but it's by no means a great match or really done in a great way. It would take a couple of years for them to really work out the kinks of a match like that.
In fact, it really did. It probably took, the first really great Rumble, you're looking, 92 is
yeah, I think there's definitely great moments sprinkled throughout. Obviously with Axe and Smash starting out 1 and 2 in 1989, that was clever, and then you had other moments mixed in, like the Warrior Hogan stare down moment. But yeah, I would say 92 with Flair being the Iron Man was really the first complete Royal Rumble that reached classic status.
Yeah, they had. I remember one year, DiBiase goes quite long. He's draws 2, and it gets a massive pop when he's finally eliminated. And I think you can see it, and then the following year they have Rick Martel play a similar role where he stayed in for even longer, and you can see the idea of somebody going in early, developing as each Rumble goes by. But yeah, I think one of the things with Wargames is that it's actually structured in such a way that the psychology of each segment is almost already written. So because the heels always have the advantage, every single time the heel comes in, he's going to, use that advantage to swing it to their favor. They beat up on the face. Then it's already set up for the face coming in to, be all fired up and make the save. Right? Every single time. I mean, and that's what happened in this. Every single time one of the Road Warriors or Nikita, basically when each of the Road Warriors and Nikita came in, it was a massive moment because they were making a big save.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's one of those interesting things because obviously we haven't had a War Games since, over a decade, a true War Games. So it would be interesting to see if this type of match, how it would play out now, because it is definitely a match that follows, a distinct script with its basic structure, and it works, and it worked almost every time it followed that script. Yeah. And you can sprinkle in, your own flavor or little touches to the match, but it definitely follows a distinct structure, and that's, in wrestling nowadays, that's one of the main criticisms of it, is it's the same thing. Yeah. So it would be interesting to see if a crowd today could really sit through a match like this, structure-wise, knowing essentially what's going to happen at the end. That'd be an interesting thing to ponder. I think it would work, but I think it would definitely need the correct individuals. Because in this match, everybody either got a massive pop or was pretty much hated on their respective sides. So that really helped with the characters, with the crowd going crazy when each person entered the match.
Yeah, and also in this match, you basically had 4 Supermen, or 3 Supermen and Dusty, basically, versus a team of technical, cowardly heels. Right, so, if you had a monster heel in there, it would completely change the dynamic of the match. If you put a Vader in there or someone like that, it maybe wouldn't work in the same way. This structure works when it's the Road Warriors on one side and Tully and Arn on the other,
Yeah, that's one thing we'll have to see. I know, War Games 91, Sid is on the heel side.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see, how that works. Yeah, last time I watched that match, I liked it quite a bit, but it has been a while. So that will be an interesting, definitely a different dynamic from who was on the heel side in this match. I guess Luger's the closest to kind of a powerhouse on the heel side, but
I noticed
definitely not a monster like somebody like Sid or Vader.
When Luger entered, there was little discernible impact on the actual match. It seemed like that was the entrance that seemed most anticlimactic. I guess he was entering at a time where, the match was getting chaotic anyway. But it's like, Nikita comes in and it's a big deal. Luger comes in and it didn't really feel like much in this match. Can you remember Luger's entrance?
To me, the entrance that sort of stuck with me a little bit was Flair. I didn't really think Flair came off as... And that's definitely his heel character, but to me he didn't come off as much of the world champion in this match, and B as like the ace of the company. He did seem kind of just maybe the leader of the Horsemen in some way, but sort of just one of a group, not any distinction from him.
No, that's true. He entered third, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he entered third, which I thought was kind of it'd been a while since I'd watched this match, so I'd forgotten the order, and I just kind of assumed that he entered right before JJ because I figured they'd save JJ for last. But I was a little bit surprised when the door opened up and Flair came charging in.
Yeah.
But this is a really great match. The finish maybe notches it down a little bit because they did, Ross on commentary kept talking about how they were trying to, isolate JJ on his own. And Flair was kind of lingering around, seemed out of position. It didn't come off, I don't think, as great as they hoped it would. And with the miking of the ring, you couldn't really hear JJ submit. to get that kind of satisfactory moment. So the bell just sort of rings, and they announce the Superpowers and Road Warriors as the winners, and the crowd goes nuts. But there's a little bit of satisfaction missed in actually hearing JJ audibly quit.
Yeah, apparently he legitimately hurt his shoulder in this match.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
He got injured, and that will become significant later. Yeah, to me, it came. I mean, I've always got Jesse Ventura in my mind, beating up a manager. I thought the Road Warriors came off a little bit like bullies, because they really beat the shit out of Dylan. But I guess the Horsemen should have been around to help him out a bit more or protect him.
Yeah, and I'm sure on the TV it kind of was played in the way where, I mean, obviously JJ sort of had it coming with what all he'd done up to this point.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've seen how instrumental he's been in almost every single match that he's been involved with so far. And I did notice on this show that this is the first time, I think, that we've seen that JJ is the manager of all of the Horsemen. I don't know if you've noticed, but so far he's only really been Tully's manager. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, it did seem, I mean, obviously we're not covering the TV, and with these shows it's kind of tough so far because we haven't had any backstage interviews or anything like that since the Horsemen formed, but as far as just the commercial releases, this release as a whole really felt like where the Horsemen were more of a unit.
Yeah.
Than any other one we've seen so far.
So the next match on the tape, that one was in the Omni, that match, and this one is also in the Omni, right? Barry Windham versus Rick Steiner. So yeah, we have Barry Windham versus Rick Steiner, and I thought this was a little curiosity cropping up on this. Steiner, I believe, was a UWF guy at this point, and he just kind of come over as part of that package, and he's a heel here, and Windham is the face. We get Steiner on top to start. We get a nice Steiner line, and then a really nice flying clothesline from him. We get a backdrop, a belly-to-back suplex, stiff elbow to the outside, then a suplex from Steiner back in. But then, out of nowhere, Windham gets a surprise pin after no offense at all, and that's it. That's the match. I quite like. I mean, I've always had I always like the Steiner's offense. I think it looks stylish and flashy. What do you make of this?
I think as we go along, that'll be one thing that I'm willing to go in it with an open mind, because I do think the Steiners as a whole is a team that I've liked less than most.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always liked their offense, but I think as far as sort of the little moments that structure a match together, they really faltered before. But that's something that we can see if my opinion changes as we go along here. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a whole lot to judge on. I mean, Rick gave a good bit of power moves to Windham. Everything looked pretty good. But then, like you said, I guess he flipped Windham over, or Windham flipped over Steiner after the suplex and got the 3 count kind of out of nowhere, and only a couple of minutes were shown. So you couldn't really get a full sense of whether this match was good or not. What we saw was fine, but not a lot to it.
Yeah, I actually thought that Rick Steiner worked this match like Kurt Angle or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of... He seems to be working in a different mode to most of the other guys at this point.
Definitely working in kind of a stiff, a lot of throws and suplexes. A pretty interesting style. I mean, in this Omni show, this would have not been one of the top 3 matches on the card.
No.
So, compare this match to what we were seeing even, about 4 years before in some of the early Starcades. This is a definitely different type of match and a lot more action-packed.
So one of the things that interests me, right, is that I, often before I, do these shows, I take a look just to see what some of, I take a look at a Scott Keith review I look at Matt Petticord's site. I look at the original newsletters from the time just to see what sort of ratings people give these matches. And both Scott Keith, and Matt Petticord, our friend who's linked us, gave this match dud, 0 stars. I don't see that. Why are they giving this match 0 stars? Or the dud rating?
I would guess that would just be maybe from what was shown. I don't know. To me, we don't really do star ratings here. This would be a match I would absolutely not want to rate. Would kind of refuse to give a star rating to, just because of what's shown is so limited.
Yeah.
I don't know how long the match was to begin with, but we really come in right, like we said in the Crockett Cup tape. It really cuts right to the finishing stretch, so we get no context in what's developed before.
No, I agree. I guess the rationale is that the finish comes out of nowhere, but
that's true too. Yeah.
Moving on from that very brief kind of little match that we see, we have Nikita Koloff versus Lex Luger. Nikita Koloff is still the US champion here, and this is a cage match for the US belt. And Nikita, of course, has had that belt since he won it from Magnum TA ages ago. Did he win it directly from Magnum TA? I'm trying to remember now. Can you remember how he won?
I can't remember either what the actual lineage is of the belt. I can look that up while you talk.
Yeah. So we joined the. I believe this was quite a long match. And we join it just before Tom Miller tells us that there is 25 minutes have elapsed. So obviously this is clipped. Now I think that Bob Caudle is on commentary here, but the audio is so bad. Again, I can barely hear the commentary, and it's Caudle and somebody else, and I couldn't make out who that was. It didn't sound like Tony Schiavone, and it didn't sound like Jim Ross, and it also didn't sound like David Crockett. So it may well be Johnny Weaver if he's still around. Did you make out who these commentators were?
I didn't even make note of it. I did notice Caudle.
Yeah.
But and this is really, of all the shows we've done, this one is one where the commentary really flips.
Yeah.
Back and forth, so it gets really confusing with the revolving door. You have Schiavone, Caudle, and Ross, and a variety of roles on this tape.
Yeah. Well,
and I looked it up, and Nikita did defeat Magnum TA in the best of 7 series to win it. Though WWE officially says it was a tournament final.
Right. Okay.
So.
For some reason I can't. That couldn't have happened on one of the shows we've done, because I can't remember it.
No, I think that was maybe on the Saturday night show. August 17th, 1986 is the date of it. It just says Charlotte, North Carolina live event. So I don't know.
Before we get into this match, I noticed the referee is Earl Hebner, and I'm very surprised that he's still around. I really would have thought he would have been in the WWF by this point.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize that either. We're after WrestleMania 3, and yeah. I would have sworn he was. But I guess that was his brother. It's so tough. You're used to Earl in the Attitude Era, but I guess Dave was around at that time.
He came in for the evil twin referee angle, and I think
by that time now that definitely was both of them. So that's, I think, February of '88.
Yeah.
So we know for sure that he's winding down, but I would have expected by this point in time he was already in WWF.
So we get a very long headlock sequence to start with here from Luger. We get the elbow from Luger, then back to a headlock kind of chinlock thing. It just starts off as a headlock and then morphs into a chinlock. and he sits in that for what feels like a very long time. Finally, this kind of hold breaks, and Luger gives Nikita a nice swinging net breaker, which is a move I didn't know was in his repertoire. He kicks and elbows his neck with the same sort of viciousness that we saw in the last match between these guys from the Crockett Cup.
Right.
We get a nice clothesline for a 2 count. We get a pile driver attempt, which is reversed. Then we get a full Nelson. So obviously, I should have mentioned that Nikita's neck is still injured here. He's still wearing the brace. I thought the full Nelson was a strangely old-fashioned move. Did you think that? How many times do guys bust out a full Nelson?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I guess still in this point in time we had Hercules and Billy Jack Haynes fighting over the full Nelson over in WWF, so it was still around, but definitely think it was kind of on its way out.
Feels like an old school move.
Yeah, the last person I can remember doing it, really, and I'm sure somebody else may come up with a better example, but I know the Warlord did it in WWF, but...
Yeah, he did use the full Nelson.
Yeah.
We get back and forth punches now, but Luger comes out on top. 30 minutes have gone, we're told. And I noticed that they still haven't gone to the cage, Chad, and no blood. Then Luger goes back to the chin lock, and I couldn't help think that asking these two guys to go 30 minutes plus in a cage is asking a lot of these two particular workers. It's not a match that I'd say is ideally suited to either of them.
No. Yeah, that was a strange choice from the amount of time and the actual gimmick of the cage to the story they're trying to tell didn't seem to match up either.
Yeah, I mean, Nikita had definitely improved a hell of a lot as a worker in the time that we've seen him, but I still don't think that he could have necessarily carried somebody like Luger, who is still, relatively early in his career,
right,
to a 30-plus minute cage match, which is, I guess, why we get so much rest hold. Anyway, we get 4 punches in the corner, and Nikita hits the sickle, and then we get a ref bump. J.J. Dillon is sneaking around outside, and he drops a chair into the cage, and obviously Luger whacks Nikita with it, who is completely out of it after being nailed with a chair, and he gets Nikita in a torture rack, and his arm drops 3 times. So how many times do you see that? The arm dropping 3 times, and we have the winner and new US champ, Lex Luger. So we don't see that many title changes, so this is a pretty big deal. What do you think of this one?
This match is kind of conflicting. I talked a little bit about it just a minute ago with the psychology of the cage, but the psychology of the actual match I thought was very good. As I said on the last podcast, I really love story-oriented matches, and this one was definitely a story-oriented match on Nikita's neck, and actually paid off with the torture rack, which you don't see very much, where you actually get a finish that really pays off on the story of the match. But that being said, they did not use the cage very well at all as a weapon. Didn't seem like there was any need for the cage besides to keep JJ out, but he interferes anyway and throws the chair over. And the other thing is, even though the story was very sound, we did get a lot of long rest holds. The chin lock, while not the worst chin lock I've ever seen applied, was applied for a long time. Yeah. Minutes went by where he was in the chin lock, and then also the full Nelson. So, as us coming in at the 25-minute mark, I can only imagine the amount of rest holds that predated when they cut in at this tape. So that, definitely not a great match, or even I'd say a good match. It's a match that has really good sound psychology.
Yeah.
So I don't want to totally blast it because it was, quite frankly, really smartly worked, which is not something you'd expect from Lex Luger versus Nikita Koloff going in.
Mm-hmm.
But the action was lacking in a lot of areas.
No, I'd basically agree with that analysis. I think we've come to expect a lot of blood now, watching these NWA shows, and to have a cage match with no blood at all is quite surprising. I mean,
just seeing the sense of urgency that everything in the War Games match had, and the only thing bridging those matches was the 2-minute Rick Steiner Barry Windham match. So you're essentially going from one match to the other. So seeing the urgency in that match and really people going full blast into the cage and shaking the structure and all that, to go from that to a 4-minute chin lock in a cage was pretty jarring and sort of took you out of it.
Yeah, that match was in Charlotte, by the way, in the Memorial Stadium.
Is that in Charlotte or Greensboro?
It could have been in Greensboro. You're right. Actually, I think you might be right. I think it's in Greensboro.
Yeah, I think it's in Greensboro. Yep.
So the next match is a Texas Death Match between Dick Murdoch, who's got Eddie Gilbert in his corner, against Dr. Death, Steve Williams, who is a UWF guy and one of Jim Ross's favorites, as we know. And we get a very brief clip of the boss, Magnum TA, who's in Steve Williams' corner. Ross and Shivani are back on commentary now. And Murdoch attacks Williams with a weapon. Ross calls him a cagey veteran. Murdoch knees Williams' arm, which is injured, is taped up. Williams makes a comeback and hits I think he hits a 4-point stance, and Jim Ross basically almost orgasms on commentary. He got when he gets excited, I'd say he was almost kind of Austin excited here for this 4-point stance.
Yeah.
He nails Murdoch with a cast and wins with a 10 count. Because obviously a last man standing Texas Death Match is a 10 count. Post match, he beats up Gilbert for good measure. Murdoch tries to sneak attack with a chair, but Williams nails him with Magnum's cane. And according to Dave Meltzer, this was the best match of the undercard on this particular show, and I think this is the back in
Omni,
yeah. So best match of the undercard, Chad.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that, given that the Rock and Roll Express Midnight match was still coming up, and that was in the Omni.
Yeah.
This is kind of along the lines of the Wyndham Steiner match. There's just not a lot to base it on. I don't think Dr. Death really became a great worker until the 90s over in Japan. He had a real hot streak there. Here, he was kind of hot and cold. He could do power moves really well, but couldn't really put together a great match. Murdoch didn't seem really on his A game either in this match, so maybe it was a lot better in full, but what we saw here I didn't think was very good at all. How much Murdoch have you watched?
This is something I have to admit, okay? These are two guys that I've never understood the hype about either of them. I've never understood why Murdoch is so rated. I've never understood why what Steve Williams' rep is based on. Admittedly, I haven't seen his Japanese stuff.
Yeah.
All the Steve Williams I've ever seen has disappointed me, really.
Yeah, the Japanese stuff, I would say, mainly from about 93 to 95, that kind of area. That's really, especially 1994, just watching the 94 yearbook, I would put Steve Williams as one of the top 2 or 3 best workers in the world.
Wow. Okay.
Which honestly was not something I was prepared to say going into that set, but watching, what he did with Toshiaki Kawada and Mitsuharu Masawa in that year, and he was really portrayed himself as the top Gaijin ace over in Japan, was really refreshing. But here he was still relatively young and definitely rough around the edges. You saw that in the later UWF footage I saw where he was really rough around the edges. Murdoch is somebody that I'm really hot or cold on him. There's a lot of stuff that I've liked that I've really loved, and then a lot of stuff that I really wanted more out of that looked really good on paper, but just didn't pan out as well as I'd have hoped.
Well, I don't really, like, he just seems a bit bland to me. I don't really see anything that he does that makes me, I don't know, I'm guessing that his reputation must be built on something, but all the matches I've ever seen him in have been along these sort of lines, really, kind of neither here nor there.
Yeah, his promos are really good. He definitely, his moniker, his gimmick is Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch, and obviously Parv, you're not someone that's grown up in the South, and obviously I am.
Yeah.
So, Murdoch is somebody that I can definitely visualize as, like an uncle type character that if you grew up in the South, somebody that kind of talks and acts a lot like Dick Murdoch, notwithstanding the Ku Klux Klan association that I guess has been pretty much confirmed about him, but just his whole demeanor with him, with the way he speaks and the way he acts, I can definitely see how that would resonate to people in the South that grew up here.
Okay, and what? Given that why is he a heel character?
Well, I know in some of his promos he really comes off as boastful, and he does that really well. He really comes off as kind of a boastful dick, but then he can flip that around when he gets really fired up.
Right.
So I think that's one of his strengths, in that he can be a effective, fired up baby face that comes to save the day, but then he can also, just in like his Smoky Mountain promos and some of his Mid-South stuff that I've seen, he can really come off as a boastful, kind of pompous dick that, really shows a sense of elitism when he, I guess the gimmick is he's really no better than anybody else, but he thinks he is. And he really portrays that well.
Right, well, but have you ever seen any really good matches from him?
I've seen a few matches I would really call, definitely a ton of good matches. Like his match with Jumbo on the All Japan set. Yeah. I really liked that. I thought those were 2 really good matches to kind of start the set off. He has a match, and I'm trying to think of who all the opponent was. He was with Adrian Adonis as his partner, and it was in New Japan. It's him and Adrian Adonis versus Tatsumi Fujinami and Kingo Kimura from 12/8/1984. It's in New Japan.
Oh, I have that set. Yeah.
That is one of the, I think, one of the best New Japan matches of the 80s.
I might whack that in. Actually, I have that. I still have to watch that set. And I
Okay, yeah, that's on one of the maybe disc 6, I think. That is a very, very great match. Just a non-stop tag match that features a brutal beatdown. For we're talking 35 minutes, but it never feels boring, and really carries the intensity. He also had some really good matches with Butch Reed in Mid-South. I know you have that set.
Yeah,
that
and I really I love Butch Reed on that set.
Now his match with Butch Reed from 10/14/85, I'm looking at it now. That I recall is one of the top Mid-South matches of the 80s.
Right. Well, maybe I might go on a little Murdoch between now and the next show. I might watch a few Murdoch matches.
I mean that wouldn't be a bad little. I mean, I would think if you watched the New Japan match I talked about, the him and Adrian Adonis versus the Briscoe match from MSG at the very end of 1984.
Yeah, I've actually seen that match. The Briscoe.
I mean, I don't think I'm as high on that as some people. I mean, I definitely think it's a good match, but I would put it as good to very good. But I mean, I don't think it's one of the best matches of the 80s or anything. But that, and then his 1985 Mid-South run, which culminates in the Ted DiBiase angle, which is one of the great angles of all time, where he brainbusters DiBiase on the floor.
Yeah. Well, I think right before Murdoch comes in is around where I'd left off on the Mid-South set. And basically what happened is my All Japan set came, so I started watching All Japan, and I kind of have never gone back to Mid-South, but I probably should. There's probably some great stuff from that set that I should get back to.
That I would say would be the peak of him. So he's definitely had great matches, but I don't know if I'd necessarily call him very consistent overall.
It's interesting. Those two matches from the All Japan set were actually my when you're trying to figure out the rankings. That was often my benchmark for a 3.5-star match. So I had that was kind of my average, my kind of litmus test, and I generally put matches either above those two or below those two. They were. I wanted to make sure they were dead center because they felt like quite kind of right middle of the pack type matches,
Yeah, I kind of used that in the same fashion. I mean, I think I had both of them in the 80s or 90s in my rankings, and they were right next to each other. I remember that they were, within 2 spots of each other. Definitely good, solid matches, but not classics. I mean, that's kind of the way. I know there's the Meltzer talking point sometimes that Murdoch was a lazy worker.
Yeah.
Which I don't subscribe to that theory. I don't think there's much evidence to show that. I just don't think some of his matches really developed as well structure-wise as they could have. No fault on him being lazy or wanting to just lay around on the mat. They just didn't have quite the intensity of the structure to really make a great match.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chad. See you next time.
All right. See you, Parv.
Fans, for all of us here at WCW Center Stage, for Cowboy Bill Watts and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, I'm Jim Ross saying good night, everybody.